Good morning, everyone. It's fabulous to be here in this very wet week that we're having. I've been travelling throughout Queensland this week. I started on Monday in Rockhampton, made my way to Townsville, got in about 10 o'clock last night, and have managed to get up here this morning. I have to admit I'm a little tired. And my morning this morning, I think I was definitely woken up when the woman who handed me a coffee at the drive-through managed to pour it down my side. So I'm a little bit sticky, but I'm going to press on. And I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners. One of the great privileges of my career has been to work with many Indigenous communities throughout Queensland. One of the gifts that work has given me, and it's something that I wish more Australians could share, is just the awareness of the country and the landscape, and the fact that it is actually alive, and it's alive with spirits. And it just makes the trip, so a trip to Toowoomba becomes such a pleasant experience when you look out into the landscape with that sort of mentality, instead of just rushing from A to B. So I just implore everyone to take the opportunity to actually get to know the local Aboriginal culture that is before you, because it is such a rich opportunity to experience. I'd like to thank the organisers of this conference. I have been a long-term friend of Cam over there. It's nice to meet her, what Cam describes as her twin, Bishop Cam. Another great privilege of my current role is I get to meet people from all walks of life, different cultures, different religions. Recently I had a great wonderful opportunity to meet with Muhammad Ahadi over there. I was really pleased you could make it here, Muhammad. And of course, I work on a day-to-day basis with people like Ari, with the police ethnic advisory group, and of course there are many others. It's such a wonderful, diverse community that we live in Australia, and particularly in Queensland. And it's a great honour and a privilege to be the Human Rights Commissioner and be responsible for some aspects of looking after religious rights in particular. And today I'll be talking a little bit about religious rights. I've actually been asked today to talk about the blame game in the context of the COVID pandemic. And we all know that fear and uncertainty can lead, it seems to be part of the human condition, sadly, that fear can lead to scapegoating, to othering, and to blaming. And sadly, we saw that at the outset of the pandemic, with the Chinese community in particular being targeted initially. We saw that then evolve into people from the African community being targeted, particularly by mainstream media in Queensland. And I have to say I've been in contact with the family of those women, and they are continuing to suffer the effects of that treatment by the community, and it really does bring the entire community to shame when people who, albeit make very serious mistakes, are treated in the way that they were treated. So, for me, the pandemic has really highlighted the importance of battling that fear and insecurity that is born out of ignorance. And it's highlighted the importance of trusted information. And one of the things that we've been really fortunate to have in Queensland is a Chief Health Officer who had already established a strong, trusted relationship with the Queensland community. And I think the fact that Dr. Young had been effectively living in our living rooms with us on TV, appearing regularly for 10 years leading up to the pandemic, really gave us a big head start in Queensland, because we already had that trust, and we were prepared to embrace the restrictions that Bishop Cam outlined really well, actually. That really did hold us in great stead to get to the point where the stats that Bishop Cam actually presented really do highlight the extraordinary success that we've had in Queensland. But it has been borne out by the level of trust and the quality of the information. So recently I've been reading a bit of Martin Luther King's work, and I came across a sermon he delivered in August 1959 in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's at the height of civil unrest, obviously, in the US. And he talked about, and he was talking to his people, and he was talking about the need for tough-mindedness, but also for kind-heartedness. And he said that soft-minded people are open to manipulation by politicians. Hard-hearted people are prepared to use violence to achieve power. And he lamented the fact that soft-minded people are reluctant to engage in hard, serious thinking, and therefore are prone to having their thin minds penetrated by cleverly crafted phrases and slogans. So the public need to be tough-minded when considering the response required by the pandemic. I think Senator Jackie Lambie reminded us so passionately this week that tough-mindedness requires us to act like adults and to take responsibility for our own decisions and their potential impacts on public safety. And as I said before, I think tough-mindedness is clearly enhanced when there is clear and reliable information communicated to the public by leaders who are trusted. But governments also need to be kind-hearted, particularly when they're looking at the exemptions that should be granted. And that's something that the Commission has been trying to persuade the government of throughout, from day one of the pandemic, to be honest. So, could you have chosen a better time in the history of Queensland to introduce a Human Rights Act than the 1st of January 2020? So the Act came in. I was given this task of trying to educate 220,000 public servants about their new obligations under the Act. And then 2.5 months later, the pandemic drops, and before you know it, human rights are being restricted left, right and centre. So what is the role of the Human Rights Commission in a pandemic situation? And I have been very mindful right from the very outset that the role of the Commission is certainly not to get in the way of those who are trying to save lives. So, having said that, there is also a need for every restriction that is put in place to be tested against what I think is a very useful human rights framework and analysis framework that we now have in place in Queensland. And that framework requires government decision makers, public health officials, to consider the reasonableness of the restriction, the necessity of the restriction, which when we talk about necessity, that means you actually have to look at whether there are reasonably available alternatives to achieving what you want to achieve. And then you have to look at the proportionality of the restriction. So are the limits that are being imposed on people, and again, Bishop Can set out very usefully the level of restrictions that have progressed. Are those restrictions actually balanced against the risk posed? And again, you saw the numbers of deaths globally, and we know what the risk is. So we have, as a commission, we've continuously advocated for that analysis to be done at each stage. We've asked for the government to publish their reasons whenever they've made a decision. That hasn't happened yet to the extent that we would like, but we hope that they do get to that point where they will publish a statement of reasons within a reasonable time of introducing a restriction. And that's incidentally what the Victorian government is actually trying to do with their bill at the moment. And very strangely, they are copying a huge amount of criticism for something which really actually improves the human rights analysis in that state. So, to my mind, as we approach the next really challenging stage with the borders being open, and I have had numerous discussions with people in my travels this week who have genuine, honestly held fears about what would happen to them if they actually did have the vaccine. And it comes back to the point that I was making earlier about the importance of trusted information. And sadly, when I listen to these people and they communicate their fears for taking the vaccine, they are often quoting information that I think, to put it kindly, is contested, and it's information that I would not be relying on if I was them, and I've been encouraging them, given that I certainly wouldn't offer anyone medical advice, but I've been encouraging them to go and see their doctor and get that trusted medical advice rather than relying on the information that they can draw from the internet. But as we move forward, there is a component of people, and I think this is where the kind-heartedness needs to come in. We need to recognise that the exemptions, because there are people who genuinely cannot get a vaccine, and there are people who genuinely, in order to have one, would have to suffer extreme hardship for various reasons. We need to be compassionate, and we need to actually look at whether forcing those people effectively, and I know there's still a choice, but we need to work out whether that is actually proportionate to the risk. So in coming weeks, we're going to thankfully have some more guidance, I hope, from the Supreme Court in Queensland. So the Supreme Court will be hearing some cases that have been brought by nurses and police who are challenging the mandate. And when I talk about institutions of trust, we can all be very thankful that in Queensland we have a very strong independent judiciary, and I have a lot of confidence in the Supreme Court's ability to take the evidence from both sides of the argument, test that evidence, and come to a conclusion that is in accordance with the law, and hopefully in accordance with the needs of the community. So there is one other thing that I wanted to talk about today, and that is the introduction yesterday by the Prime Minister of the Religious Discrimination Bill. As I mentioned, I've been on the road all week, so I have not yet had an opportunity to look at it. I have had a look at previous versions of the bill, and the Commission made a submission, I think it was last year or maybe the year before, on the previous version. I want to say from the outset that, first of all, Queensland, it's important that you do know that Queensland's Anti-Discrimination Act does already protect religious belief. So it is protected in Queensland. A very small number of the complaints that the Queensland Commission receives each year involve religious discrimination. I think it's in the order of about 1%, perhaps even a little bit less. So thankfully, it's not, at least in terms of our complaints, and you can share with me your stories of discrimination. I'd love to hear them. But thankfully, it doesn't appear to be a huge issue in Queensland as compared to other areas of discrimination. But I do think it is important nationally that our national legal framework recognises and protects religious belief and freedom. That is very important. And we've heard a number of politicians talk about the importance of having that shield. My concern with the bill, however, is that it is going to go a step further than what we call the normal discrimination architecture. And it's going to create what people are calling a sword. And that sword is in the form of the ability to make statements of religious belief. I have a real concern about what that may practically do at a practical level to communities that are otherwise this is not an issue. We have good social cohesion generally across the community, and I worry about that being disturbed unnecessarily by laws being introduced that are going to give impetus to people, that very, very small number of people who are going to be encouraged by these laws, if they are introduced, to start exercising this ability to make statements of belief, thinking that they're going to be protected. What I don't think anyone has really thought through in a practical sense is what happens after someone makes a statement of belief and the person on the receiving end is upset and offended and decides to retaliate with a stream of bigotry, religious bigotry. Because what the Religious Discrimination Bill does not do is actually introduce a protection for people against religious vilification. It does not do that. We have that law in place, thankfully, in Queensland. So people are protected from religious vilification in Queensland, but that is not there at a national level, and this bill is not going to introduce that. So I'm really concerned that by introducing this bill, it's actually going to provoke social disharmony that actually isn't present in the community at the moment. And I just don't understand the need for that. Absolutely introduce protections to protect religious belief, but there is no need to introduce an ability for people to make statements of belief that are just going to encourage disharmony. So, returning now to the theme of the blame game, I'm really concerned that the Religious Discrimination Bill is just going to introduce yet another opportunity to participate and play that game. So thank you very much, everyone. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any questions you'd like to ask.